All right. I just want to welcome everybody.
Hi, everybody. Hi. Sorry to have my back to you guys.
My good friends here. We're used to it. I'm gonna pick this up just for a minute. So we're gonna get started. I know that the sound is a little bit rough in the room. We're gonna keep on trying. We'll move this microphone. Actually, I take that. No, I'm not gonna take that off. I'm not gonna take that off. We're gonna figure this out so that everybody can hear John. It just may take a few minutes. So folks on Zoom, please understand that I think your sound is okay. You can give me a thumbs up if that's true. We're going to keep on working until we get it working in the room as well. Okay. We have about 42 people on Zoom, which is great.
Oh.
And we have, I don't know, who can give me an estimate? Another 25 in the room?
More.
Perfect.
More, maybe 30. So nice crowd here today. I am going to be managing the Zoom as well. So everybody also, please forgive me if I turn away for a minute or miss a comment. We're going to do the best that we can. All right. I'm going to start by just welcoming everybody to 2026. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
2026 is a year of celebrations for many reasons. It is
That's for me.
250th anniversary of the United States of America and the Declaration of Independence. It's also the 25th anniversary of Travelers Rest State Park and Travelers Rest Connection, its nonprofit partner. So we have a lot of fun stuff planned for 2026, starting with this phenomenal new exhibit.
We're not getting captioning, although I turned that on.
Okay. I just need a little help.
Gail McGregor needs to turn off her voice. Gail,
Yeah.
you need to mute yourself, my dear.
I got you covered.
There we go.
Okay. All right.
Nothing personal.
Thanks, John. Okay. I also want to note, of course, that history didn't start in 1776. And we are gathered today on the homeland of the Séliš Bay people at a place they named Timsum. Their example as the original stewards of this land guides our work today. We are committed to respectfully sharing the history and contemporary culture of the indigenous people who lived and traveled through the ancient crossroads on this land. We learn from many indigenous artists, elders, and organizations, and we invite you to learn from and support them as well. I guess folks on Zoom are only seeing half of my face. Sorry about that, guys. I want to say a quick thank you to everyone who makes these programs possible. First and foremost, our members and donors to Travelers Rest Connection. A shout out to MCAT, Missoula's community media resource, who provided a media assistance grant to record all of our winter storytelling programs this year. And to Montana Public Radio for their promotional sponsorship. Okay, just a couple of reminders for folks on Zoom. If you can please stay muted and keep your video off during the presentation, that is helpful for saving bandwidth. If you have questions for our speaker, please type them into the chat box on Zoom, which we will monitor and ask questions or look out for any messages citing technical difficulties. We are thrilled to have John and Maclean join us today via Zoom to talk about our new exhibit, The Art of the Angle, opening today in the Visitor Center here at Travelers Rest. John is an award-winning journalist and author of several books, including Fire on the Mountain and Home Waters, a chronicle of family and a river. John was the first to read and recognize the beauty of his father's story, A River Runs Through It. John began his career in 1964 as a police reporter with the City News Bureau of Chicago and went to work for the Chicago Tribune the following year. He married Frances in 1968 while she was writing for a rival newspaper in Chicago. Lovely stories come out of that.
Yeah, we were the Romeo and Juliet of the newspaper business. A lot of people read.
John and Fran have two sons, Daniel, a science teacher in Alaska, and John Fitzroy, a public defender for the state of Maryland. During his newspaper career, he spent more than a decade as the Tribune's diplomatic correspondent at spending time as one of the Kissinger 14, the journalists who regularly traveled with Secretary of State Henry Kissinger during the era of shuttle diplomacy. So that was a lot of miles, I'm assuming.
Yep.
John retired from the Tribune in 1994 and began writing.
Oh, stop, halt. I didn't retire, I quit.
Okay.
I was 52 years old.
Get
You
another
can't
story
retire
out
at
of it,
52.
sounds like.
Yeah. I may have said that myself, but that's wrong. I quit. I had 30 years in and I was 52 and I said goodbye. I didn't take a pension for 13 years.
Wow. All right. But you left the Tribune and you started writing the books that we are now familiar
That's right.
with.
Started
Okay.
Fire on the Mountain. Yeah.
And I just want to say that we are fortunate that John still travels to Montana each summer to fish his family's home waters and to share stories with us. So I'm going to try to set this microphone up so that the folks in the room can hear John well. And John, take it away.
Well, first of all, it's a surprise and a great pleasure to be here and to have the exhibit going up at Travelers Rest State Park. This is kind of a magic event in my life, the whole Art of the Angle exhibit. I had no idea that anything like this was going to happen, that I would be involved with anything like this. I've known all my life I was going to be a writer. I've been a writer for 60 years. That's not a big surprise. But to get involved with the wood engravings and the people who do them, with people who put on these kinds of exhibitions, has been a gift for my old age. It started in little pieces and parts a long time ago. I got a call from a guy named Henry Hughes, who's a professor of English at Western Oregon State University. And I didn't know him. He didn't know me. He said, I'm doing an essay on all the illustrations in all the editions of A River Runs Through It. I said, oh, that's a good idea. And he said, well, yeah, but I'm having trouble with the University of Chicago Press. They're not cooperating with me, and I can't find the guy who did the original illustrations for what we all call the Little Blue Book. And you can see it on the wall up there, the Little Blue Book, with that wonderful wood engraving, or looks like a wood engraving.
John, I'm gonna interrupt you just for a second. I think
I've turned into an otter.
That's me. I'm the otter.
I always wanted to be an otter. I thought that, if you come back as an animal, that's when I'd like to come back. I just
I'm
did.
trying to figure out where I can place this mic. Is the sound coming out of here?
I think it's coming from the front.
Okay. I just want to put it down so I don't have to hold it. John, can you tell us this? You can start talking again. See if that's better.
Okay, let me know if this works. Does this work? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Should I keep going? No, it did not work.
We're still working on it.
Okay.
We're getting a little bit of feedback.
I get
Is
that all
everybody
the
okay?
time.
All right. We're gonna give it a shot. For anybody that was wondering about it, the picture from the Little Blue Book, you can see reproduced over here on the wall in the room. And for those of you on Zoom, you'll have to come and see it in person.
That's right. You're encouraged to do so.
Okay. All right, John.
Okay, here I go.
Take it away.
Anyway, Henry said, he was having trouble with the UC Press. They weren't taking him seriously. So I called him up and I said, hey, is the guy who did that still around? They said, no, he's retired and he lives in Hyde Park, which is the University of Chicago neighborhood. And here's his telephone number. So I called him up. His name is Robert Williamson. And I said, Mr. Williams, I'm going to turn you over to Henry Hughes. But before I do that, I got a question for you. I said, the cover of the Little Blue Book has this image of a bluff with the river below it and trees in the background. Where is that? People have gone all over the state of Montana looking for that, and they can't find it. They went down to Wyoming looking for it. Guys went down the Smith River, so with the book in hand, we're going to find this place. Nobody can find it. Where is it? He said, it's in my imagination. He said, I read your dad's book and I looked at the drawings and things that he had brought back from Montana, which is where I thought it came from. And he said, I put it all together and this is what the book looks like to me. And he's exactly right. And it's a wonderful image. By the way, there is a very similar setting on the North Fork of the Blackfoot. If you go down there, it's serendipitous. It's not the one on which the drawing is based. So we solved that one. Then I turned him over to Henry. Henry wrote an essay for the American Journal of Fly Fishing, which is the great intellectual journal of fly fishing, and won a prize as the best essay of the year. And he went through all the editions. Okay, that's great. I put that away and didn't think a lot more about it. And time went on, and I got to doing Home Waters, my memoir. When I started out in the writing business, I tried to write as differently as I could, and more like a journalist, rather than try to be like my father and write exalted, noble prose. And Fire on the Mountain is a very good example of that. And I wouldn't do it any differently today. But as I spent 25 years writing and made an independent reputation for myself, I loosened up. And when I got to Home Waters, I loosened up quite a bit. And I thought, look, this thing is going to be compared as the background story of A River Runs Through It. I might as well just admit that and make something of it. And I've always loved the illustrations in A River Runs Through It, and the Blue Book, and the Little Blue Book, and others that were done over the years. So I asked my editor at HarperCollins, I said, why don't we do that? Why don't we have wood engravings? I love these black and white things. They're kind of like radio. They leave a lot to the imagination. You have to fill in some here. You got to fill the color in. And he said, that's a great idea. Let's see if I can get any money for it. And he did. And so we did Home Waters. We got to the end of Home Waters. We're kind of ready to put the thing to bed. And he said, we've run out of money. I said, what do you mean? He said, we're short one wood engraving at the end, and we've run out of money. Long pause. And so I filled the pause. I said, all right, I'll pay for it. And yeah, I did. And the final wood engraving there ties the whole thing together. Because if you look at the first one, and those are all up on the board there, the first one, the introductory one, has a bend of the Blackfoot River, and there are three figures in it. Two in the foreground, a tall figure and a little boy figure, and then a middle-sized figure in the middle distance. And that's the way we fished, and that's why it's that way. I am standing with George Kuhnebergs when I was a little boy in the foreground, and we're fishing together. And my father is off on his own. He's in the background, fishing on his own. He's the medium-sized figure. You get to the last wood engraving in Home Waters, and it's one moderately middle-aged figure fishing in a very similar setting on the Blackfoot River. And that's me. To me, that's the way it works. That's me at the end of the day when George and my father are gone. I've grown up and I'm still fishing the Blackfoot River. Fine. What happens next? What happened next was the guy who did the wood engravings, Wesley Bates, gave me a set of the originals. Then we did another book, HarperCollins, and I did the centennial edition of Ernest Hemingway's Big Two-Hearted River. And there wasn't any question there. We just put wood engravings in it so that it tied in. And I got a set of those. I got the original set of those wood engravings. And then in the course of this, I kept pushing, and I wound up with Robert Williams again. No, I'm sorry, it wasn't Williams. It was another guy who had done the Barry Moser edition of A River Runs Through It. Barry Moser was at the time, and may still be, the greatest wood engraver, had the best reputation of anybody in the world. And he did A River Runs Through It. And when he got done with that, he turned over a set of the wood engravings to the University of Chicago Press for a special edition. And I wound up with those. So I had these three sets of wood engravings, and they sat on my desk, and they weren't doing anybody any good. Not me. I barely looked at them once a year. and certainly nobody else looked at them. So I was fishing with a pal of mine in Virginia, Tom Sadler. He's a big deal in conservation, river conservation in Virginia, and a very fine guy. And I was whining away. I said, "Oh, Tom, I've got all these beautiful illustrations, and they're not doing anybody the least bit of good." He said, "Well, I got a friend at the National Museum, National Sporting Library and Museum in Middleburg, Virginia, who loves wood engravings, and they're trying to get away from doing just horses. That's in the middle of horse country, and trying to get into fly fishing. Let me talk to her." So he did. And he talked to Colleen Yeager, who was the head of it at the time. She loved the idea and said, "Why don't we do an exhibition?" And we did. It opened last April. It ran through to September. And I thought, well, that's great. I went down there. We had a big time. People liked it. Colleen was wonderful. And I thought, well, that's the end of that. I donated all the wood engravings to the museum so that they would be available if anybody wanted them. Then Colleen got busy and got a hold of Molly Stockton at Travelers Rest, and this is all going on without me. I'm out of this. And between the two of them, they cooked up what you see today, which is an exhibition tour for the art of the angle. It's going to be 2 years in Montana. It starts at Travelers Rest State Park. I love the fact that it starts at Travelers Rest State Park. That's a place where there has been modern discovery of important things. And there are a couple of instances in my books and in book that I've written and in the process of getting published that involve discovery of things in modern times. It isn't all old and dead and gone. There's a lot of stuff around. Travelers Rest State Park came through with this wonderful discovery of where that place actually is. Yes, it was used by Lewis and Clark on the way out, and on the way back, it was also used for centuries by Native Americans. That's a very important site. And learning the story of the park, to me, I've loved being there. I just go there when I can. I find it a big turn on that this stuff isn't over. There's still things to be found out. So that's how it all came to pass.
Awesome. Whew. Okay, so I know, John, that there are going to be a lot of questions both in the room and on Zoom, and I'm going to start with some of my own. For the folks in the room, you can see that we have 3 walls that are the woodblock prints. But John, we also have a couple of watercolors. And I wonder if you could tell folks about Fishing into the Twilight and these 2 beautiful watercolors from Field and Stream magazine. And I'm just fascinated by the change and the different style of art that was selected for those.
Yeah. Quite apart from the art of the angle, I was writing a story for Field and Stream. I used to read Field and Stream when I was a kid, Robert Rourke, The Old Man and the Boy, and all that stuff. And I've always wanted to write for him. I wrote for Sports Afield and other places, but I had never hit Field and Stream. So I thought, that's what I'm going to do with my old age. I'm going to write for Field and Stream. So I wrote a story for him. And the editor there, Colin Kearns, is a very nice guy, and he signed somebody to do a piece on home waters. They've done a wonderful job on it. So I called him up and I said, "Hey, I got a story for you, Colin." He said, "Oh, that's wonderful. Love to see it." So I sent it to him. Silence followed. About 10 days later, I called him up and I said, "Hi, Colin." He said, "Did you get that story I sent you?" "Yeah." I said, "Well, Colin, what did you think of the story?" "I didn't like it." "Colin, what didn't you like about my story?" "It was about fishing." And I thought, Field and Stream. Did you miss the last part of that? I didn't say that. What I said was, "Well, what were you looking for, Colin?" He said, "I was looking for something more meditative." And it hurt. But I said, well, look, why don't we do this? Why don't I take this back for a couple of weeks and see what I can do? He said, why don't you do that? And I swear to you, that is the way that conversation went. That is almost verbatim. And it certainly matches the tone. And this guy's my friend, you know. So I took it back and I spent a week in recovery, and then I got to work on it and produced a story that is a gift to me from Colin Kearns. He was absolutely right. I shouldn't be writing, you know, I cast into the ripple, a big fish took it, I landed him, I'm a hero. That kind of, no, come on. You got something else here. And I wrote a story called Fishing into the Twilight. And it's about, it starts out being what it's like to fish when you're old. You know, you lose certain things, you can't wade the way you did and so on. It's too easy to make a catalog of what you lose. Let's make a catalog of what you gain. You gain spiritual content. It really means something to you. You start thinking about your whole life. And if your dad took you fishing when you were a boy and got you started, as happened with me, and I can't tell you how often and how common that story is, then why don't you take your son fishing and see what it feels like, because it feels wonderful, that kind of thing. So that was the story. And it worked. And I sent it into Colin, and he said, well, we loved it. We just wished it was longer. I said, well, you know, longer. That sounds to me like a book. So I started working on more stories, and I have a book. It's in advanced draft, and some of it is kind of mystical, and some of it is not. But I got into halfway through writing about what it's like to fish when you're old, was the realization of how I got into fishing and why I fish. Why do I do this? You know, how did this all happen? And I got into it kind of easily. You know, my grandfather, the Reverend John Norman Maclean, we share the same name, started us on this, came down from Canada, took up fly fishing because it was what you do here in the new country, taught his sons, Norman and Paul. Norman passed it on to me. I've passed it on to my kids. It comes out differently each time. So I was dealing with that. I thought, what I'm really dealing with here is what has haunted my family and what haunts The River Runs Through It, the book, and what haunts all of this, which is the murder of my uncle, Paul. I was supposed to be Paul. I'm not Paul, thanks be to God. But that parallel has always been there. And what I had discovered after I wrote Home Waters was that I didn't quite have the story right, or at least I didn't have the whole story. In Home Waters, I used documents and factual memories to describe how Paul was murdered. It is an unsolved robbery. It remains a cold case to this day. There isn't any, you're never going to solve it completely. But I had the coroner's reports, which I was able to get because I was the closest living relative, all kinds of stuff like that. So I've done it. I've done it. We don't have to go there anymore. And I got calls from two old friends of my dad's and mine. And I say, oh, they're the guys in their 90s when they called me up. They said, John, you don't have it. Your father told a very different story about this to me. These guys don't know each other. One was vice president of the University of Chicago and a Kennedy hard hitter, Mike Claffey, and the other was an Episcopal priest who was the Father Peter Powell. Those of you who know the scholarship of the spiritual life of North American Plains Indians know Father Peter Powell. He was a leading scholar in that. And they told the same story. But your dad told us that his brother had been killed by Irish gangsters over a gambling debt. The Irish gangsters are kind of the Studs Lonigan, James Farrell people in the far south side, very violent and so on. There's almost no doubt that Paul was in debt to a gang, and probably it could have been that. But that they killed him, I don't think is factual. So I started getting into this because this is the story of how it all started. I mean, this is the Reverend and Norman, and a river runs through it. And the more I looked at it, the more I realized the enormity of what my father was telling these guys, which is that he had participated in Paul's murder. Paul had come to him and asked for money to pay these guys off. That had happened before in Montana. And the Reverend and my father had given Paul the money grudgingly, but they'd done it. This time, my dad said, no, you got to face up to your consequences of your actions. And that haunted him the rest of his life. There's this permeable barrier between fiction and nonfiction when you get into things like extreme grief, which is what he got into. And so I started going back and looking at what he was doing while all this was going on, while he was telling this story to these people. And I was able to document that because there's a letter that he wrote to Mike Claffey that I have. I have the original of it. It's going to wind up at the University of Chicago Library. And he talks about this. And I can take the date and match it to exactly what he was writing at the time, because there's a very fine book out, which is somewhere on my desk. Wait a minute. Here it is. This is Norman Maclean's A River Runs Through It, The Search for Beauty by George Jensen and Heidi Skurrat-Harris. And don't try to buy it because it's $133. It's an academic book. They gave me a copy, very generous. But they spent years going over the drafts of A River Runs Through It. And they add things like letters and so on. So I found out what he was doing when he was telling Claffey this story. He was writing about Paul. That's where he was in the book. He had what he wouldn't even call a draft of A River Runs Through It. It was so haphazard. And he was turning it into the real first draft of A River Runs Through It. And he confirms that in a second letter to Bud Moore, whom I bet half the people in the room, if not more, know about. Bud was his great friend. He was the Powell District Ranger, a wonderful man and a great conservationist. Anyway, in the letter, that's what he says. So, wait a minute, I've got a bigger story here than catching or losing fish or stumbling around when you're 82 years old in a river. And so I did that part. And it took some doing to get the transition, but I think I've got it. And it makes it a bigger story. The book isn't very long, 16,000, 17,000 words. I'm looking for a Montana publisher and hoping to find one.
Well, we can't wait until it's done and we can read it. I'm going to just encourage folks who are online, if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. I do have one more, and I think you just touched on a lot of this, John, is about that difference between truth and fact when you're writing. It sounds like, when you did the research into Paul's death and were looking at the coroner's reports, media at the time and things like that, you had some facts in front of you, but then you were digging a little bit more recently into maybe what the full truth was. And I wonder about how that carries through from a writer like Hemingway. We have these beautiful illustrations of the Centennial edition of the Nick Adams story. And I think Hemingway was another one of those writers who teetered on the edge of truth and fact often.
Oh, he didn't teeter. He fell right over. No, Hemingway's whole theory was that first you live it, then you write it. And it's a translation. I mean, A Big Two-Hearted River didn't happen the way he said it happened. He was with a bunch of guys. Hemingway was a very social person. There's very little of him off on his own alone. He didn't do that. He liked to have people around. And he had several friends with him on that trip. He started the notes for Big Two-Hearted River by acknowledging that in the first scratchings about it. And he quickly cut them out because he realized that if you do that, if you just make it one person, Nick Adams, it gains enormously in intensity. There's only one other person mentioned in that whole story, and that person is off stage. It's the guy who had a coffee fetish. And there's a paragraph or two about how this guy made coffee. I think Hemingway liked that because it was ritualistic. And he loved ritual of that kind and so on. And I think it was kind of a mistake, but it doesn't hurt anything. I mean, it isn't big enough. Truth and fiction, I mean, he wrote fiction. Hemingway wrote fiction. I've read his journalism. It was good, but it was also close to fiction at times. Some of his World War II stuff, if you read it, the dialogue is not believable. It doesn't happen that way. People don't talk the way Ernest Hemingway wrote. If you try to do that in mixed company, people look at you like you're, what? You know, that's really weird. And people are always saying, well, Hemingway's dialogue is so realistic. No, it is not realistic. It is imagined dialogue, and it's heightened dialogue. It doesn't have anything to do with the way people really talk. It takes it's not true. It takes what do people really do, and it distills and heightens it. But it takes it away, very much away from a normal setting. So when I talk about the impermeable barrier, you get to grief. And I spent a lot of time dealing with people who are in grief, people children were burned in fires. Spent 30 years in journalism. You know, you just get a lot of it. And they thirst for truth. They want to know how it happened, but all around them is untruth. Things are magnified and out of proportion, and swollen and bruised, and they don't resemble what you would regard as truth. And yet there is this underlying need to, how did it happen? How did my son die? Kind of stuff. So I think we are stuck with that as human beings.
That's a great point. All right, I want to turn it over to folks in the room. Does anybody in here have a question that they would like to ask John? Oh, Robert, do you want to come up and speak into the mic for us? Sorry, you got to go that way.
Could you just tell us the difference between a journalist and a reporter?
Oh, is there a difference between a journalist and a reporter?
No. No, I don't think so. A reporter, I mean, you could make up one if you wanted to and say a reporter is a stenographer and a journalist is an analyst, and get somewhere with that. But no, I wouldn't divide that. When I identify myself as a journalist, I really would prefer to do it as a reporter. But if you say as a reporter, you're eliminating the writing feature, kind of. Reporters write, but maybe a journalist is just a fuller example. It includes writing, it includes analysis, it can include opinion. Being a reporter is David Brooks, Peggy Noonan, Karl Rove. Are they reporters? They report a lot, but they're journalists. The Associated Press beat reporter at the White House is a reporter and a journalist. So yeah, that's okay. I understand why you asked the question. That's not a bad question. No, that's a good one.
Nicely done. Nicely done. Anybody else? Questions for John? There's a lot of whispering around me. Okay, well, you're good. Oh, here we go. Terry? Okay.
There's a opera being made of a riverfront. Is he working with them? Is he familiar with it?
So we have a question about the opera of A River Runs Through It. So please tell us a little bit. Have you been involved in it? And
I've been involved in it in a peripheral way. Yes, there is an opera. The Montana Opera Company in Bozeman has put it together. They've gotten a cast. I'm going to be with them in New York City in April, where they're going to basically audition with the New York crowd. Who don't have a Montana approach to it, which presumably gives it leeway to begin with. So a cold, hard look at it. It's an interesting translation That's one of the things that's been happening late in my life, is that things are getting translated, like the art of the angle. It's getting translated into wood engravings. My book, Home Waters, was translated into a modern dance by a dance class at Northern Kentucky University, and they did a wonderful job. It's on YouTube. You can see it if you like. It was great live. It was stunning live. Standing ovation kind of thing. It doesn't work that well on YouTube. There were kids. They did a beautiful job. Their hearts were in it. Their bodies were in it, and so on. And it was kind of a one-off. They then produced it later and filmed it at great expense because it had been such a success. But I think that some of these things, they happen and then they're over. It's kind of a happening. So we'll see what the Bozeman Opera produces in the way of a final production. It premieres in September in Bozeman. I'm hopeful. It's kind of daunting to do that because there's been a movie about this that is still an enormous success. I mean, that movie is still around. With the 50th anniversary of the publication of A River Runs Through It coming up this year, 2026. This is the 50th anniversary. The movie is going to be shown a lot. I get the counterfoils on this kind of thing. It's going to be on TV. It's going to be here. It's going to be there. And how many years ago was that? It was 1992, I think, that it was first produced. So you have that as a standard. I might add that Tom Skerritt, who played my grandfather, has produced the pilot for a 6-part series on conservation of the Gallatin River. And there's going to be a panel and discussion about that in Santa Barbara in March. I'm going to go be part of that, basically a cheering section for Tom. So A River Runs Through It will be much discussed there. So all kinds of things are happening this year, and the opera is going to have to compete with that.
Well, a shameless plug for multiple organizations here. The Roxy Theater is going to do a whole weekend with Trout Unlimited showing the movie A River Runs Through It. And I've been enlisted to do a movie and book club on that Sunday morning. So John, I may be calling you back with more questions. Also, keep in mind that I'm forgetting the name of the group that is doing the 50th anniversary celebration here that runs the Maclean Festival. Cheryl, help me out.
Alpine Artisans.
Alpine Artisans, thank you very much. They will host the Maclean Festival in Missoula and Sealy in October. So we'll have another opportunity to celebrate the 50th anniversary of A River Runs Through It.
With your wood cuttings thing too.
So the wood cuttings, unfortunately, at that time they'll still be in Montana. They will be at the CM Russell Museum in Great Falls.
I mean, your workshop.
Oh, thank you. So some other programs that are happening in 2 weeks on January 17th, we are going to have a woodblock artist from Missoula doing a workshop here. If you are interested, I can see me afterwards or email me and I can get you a link to register for that. We'll also be doing with Trout Unlimited some fly tying workshops here on Saturdays in February. So come for storytelling at 11 and then tie flies at 1. But that actually leads me to another question. So John, I'm not very outdoorsy, let's just face it. I'm a museum girl. And there are a lot of wood engravings of flies in this exhibit. And I am stunned by how different they all are. And well, I know, he gives me the shocked face. I've never looked that closely at a fly before. I've seen them more closely in these images than I ever have in person. I wondered are there any of the works from either of the books that capture a fly that's been really important in your life? I know a lot of these Cronenberg flies they're
Oh,
characters on their own.
Yeah. The Cronenberg's quill is probably the central image fly of the books. And it certainly was the one we used most often. And the one we used most often was the yellow quill. I think that it's a black and white, so you don't get it, but you get the exact shape. That has a history. It's not, I know where George got it. Jack Beamy, who was at the time, the beginning of the 20th century, probably the preeminent fisherman in America, fly fisherman in America, with due deference to the guys in the East Coast. They had their own heroes. But Beamy was the master caster. He had was a champion caster in the country for a while. And he had a little fly shop in the back of a bar on Main Street in Missoula. And he would tie flies back there. And George and a number of other people would watch him. Franz Potts was one who watched him. The guy who became Paul Bunyan watched him. And the fly that Beamy tied, that George modified and improved, was a basic quill fly where you take the hook and you put some yarn around, put some string around it, and then you tie a quill on top of that. And it was kind of thin. And what George did was to start it the same way and take the thread, wrap it around several times, and he waxed his own thread. Every time he waxed all the thread to give it body and durability. And then he would wrap a big fuzzy piece of wool yarn, orangish or yellowish, which I don't mean to be vulgar about it, but it imitated the color of insect guts if they were a little bit crushed. So that if the thing came loose, it would look like an injured insect. And over that, he put a quill and wrapped that all the way around. And you can look on a wall and see that, how that worked. And then he did the hackle and the wings, grasshopper wings on it. And it was a big fat fly, and in different sizes. George used the bigger sizes a lot. I'd use a 6 or an 8, the smaller medium-sized ones, because I was a medium-sized person. And but that was the one we started with, was the yellow quill, and it imitates all kinds of things. And it has been used in Alaska, New Zealand, South America, and it's a go-to. It looks like a bug. It really does. I'd eat that if I was a fish. And when you're fishing and nothing else works, I like dry flies and so on, but there are days that stuff just doesn't work. And when you're in that situation, put on a yellow quill and you will catch fish. I swear to you. So that was our main fly. He tied a bunch of other things that became famous. And I went back at one point in my dad's fly box, and I got originals for all the flies that are mentioned in A River Runs Through It and put those aside. And then I was missing one, which was the Bobcat Special. That's just a name they invented for it because it looked wild. And I went to George about it. I said, George, I've got all these flies segregated out, and it's really nice, but I don't have a Bobcat Special. He said, oh, that's just a thing I tied when I was getting started as a precursor to the cork grasshopper. And I think that there is an image of the cork grasshopper up on the wall too.
Yep.
So I said, well, would you tie me something? He said, well, there's nothing to it. And he tied me a couple of Bobcat Specials, and they look like Bobcats. They do. Big wing coming off the thing, big fat body, like a furry Bobcat body. As you can see why they use that.
I don't know if there's
I use a Parachute Adams, number 14 or 16 Parachute Adams most of the time.
I don't know if there's a bobcat in that case that you sent me, but one of the things in the exhibition, for folks that are in the room and also for folks at home that are going to be able to come and see the exhibit, I got to visit John and Fran this summer, and it was like Christmas morning because every time I sat down, John said, "Oh, I've got something else for you. Oh, I've got something else for you." And I came home with a suitcase full of fun things. And then finally a shipment arrived. And it is this behind me. I don't think you can see it from here, but there is a shadow box full of George Cronenberg flies that were tied and displayed, originally framed by a framer here in Lolo, which is amazing. It had the little tag on it, and repaired gracefully by our friend Lee Silliman. And so you can, maybe it's a scavenger hunt. You have to look at the images from the books and see if you can match them to the flies in the case.
Well, I can't wait to get there and see that. That's really neat. Because
Yeah.
that thing was, the glue would come loose on a lot of those, they'd fallen down. And I didn't want to turn it over to some commercial frame shop in DC where it doesn't mean anything to them. I wanted to get a little Montana action on that.
So it's great. We did have a question in the chat, whether you could say a little bit more about home waters. And I'm going to ask if, let's see, if there's a little more detail in that question. It just says, what more can John tell us about home waters?
What more I can tell you is that when I sent the draft of my new book, Fishing into the Twilight, to my editor at HarperCollins, he turned it down. It was the nicest rejection letter I've ever had. Loved the writing, but we're not going to do it. And what he said is it reads like a coda to home waters. I said, yes. Is there something wrong with that? That's exactly what it is. It takes a lot of the stuff in home waters, including fishing some of the same water that's in home waters, and carries it a little farther and kind of paws it over, like that otter image that I had when this all started. You kind of have the thing that you rub and smell and torture and look at before finally consuming it. So that's Home Waters is an unfinished book. And I think that this other one gets close to finishing it. Talk about fishing into the twilight, but it's always twilight. It doesn't ever get to the end, although the last chapter is called All Trails Come to an End. It isn't really chapters, they're stories. And they can kind of half stand up independently, but they're intertwined stories. There's 7 of them.
Okay, Cheryl has a question.
Cheryl.
John, listen, I know how much
I'll repeat it.
the watercolors from Field and Stream mean to John. I'm wondering if he could share those so that people don't miss the import of them being here in the room.
So she was just again mentioning the watercolors from the Seavers watercolors and how important they were to you. Are they part of the, I mean, they're traveling here, which we're very grateful for, but I think you were hanging on to those yourself a bit, weren't you?
No. The story on those is luck. I had no idea that they were going to be part of the article in Field and Stream, which is where they originally appeared. They contracted for those, and when I finally got a copy of the magazine, I said, "Wow, well, those are really great." Especially the one I like best, and I hate to do this, but this is the one I like best. Is one of the deer because it's so imaginative. You have the ripples down there. And you have the top half of the story is the deer, and then the bottom half of the story is this kind of mystical connection to it. And I just fell in love with it. And I got a hold of Colin Kearns, the editor of Field and Stream. I said, "Who is this guy?" He said, "Frederick Stivers." I said, "What would I have to? What should I offer him to get the original of this?" He said, "Write him." And so I wrote him, and he wrote back and said, "It's yours for a day fishing together." And this was happening at the same time that the exhibition was about to be opened in Middleburg, Virginia. And I looked at both of them, and this is about 5 days, 6 days before it. I said, what if we get those two paintings into the exhibition? Because they're very different from what's the rest of the exhibition, which is these small black and white wood engravings, which I really like. But let's face it, they're small and they're all black and white. Can we get something in there that's a contrast? These two paintings would do it. And Frederick knocked himself out, posted the stuff to Middleburg. We got them into the exhibition, and now they are part of it again. He's been extraordinarily generous. I wrote him, I said, do you mind if we do it? He says, I love having this happen. It's great. Keep it going, keep it going. So that's the story on those things. It just, things have happened. I mean, I didn't decide, hey, I'd like to have an opera made of my father's book. Nothing like that happens. People get into this. It's been around now. The book's been around for 50 years. That's half a century. It makes me feel old because I was old when that thing came out. And it's time for all this to happen. It's time for the thing to spread and for other creative people to get in on it and make something happen. And that's been, you talk about fishing into the twilight. How about writing into the twilight when it all doesn't depend on you? I haven't got a big book left in me. I don't have a 5-6 year project where I have to go in the field and spend 6 months out in the field every year and abandon my wife and, hang by a thread financially. I'm done with that. Fishing in the twilight, if I can get that done, that's my last hoorah, I think. I'll write other stuff, but it ain't going to be 300 pages. Somebody else got to pick this up,
I'm going to just scan the room for any more questions. Yes, Kim Brigham is here, and he has a question.
Hi, Kim.
I'm particularly interested in the ones that accompany logging and pimping. Do you know where they are?
So he's asking about the illustrations of other stories in A River Runs Through It, and specifically logging and pipping. But is that the little blue book? This version of the book, Kim, or which version of the book are you talking about?
He's talking about the little blue book. I know exactly what he's talking about. Yeah. There are illustrations all through the little blue book. There are 3 stories there, and the 2 stories in the back, we don't have the originals. When I talked to Robert Williams, who was the art director of the University of Chicago Press, who did the illustrations and who actually drew them, I asked him, I said, are those still available? He said, those are scratchboard drawings. And scratchboard drawings are almost like a tracing. The kind of things we did when we were kids, where you'd have a board and you'd pull the blank sheet up and then put it back down. There was something underneath it, and you take a marker and you could make a scratch, and there would be an image. That's kind of what it was like. And they are lost. They're gone, Kim. You and me both. So that what we have, what's in the exhibition, is not from the Blue Book. It is from the Barry Moser edition produced by the University of Chicago Press, based on the Pennyroyal Press, which was Barry Moser's press, his edition, which was exclusively A River Runs Through It, only that story. And in the edition that the University of Chicago Press published, using those, and those are the originals you're looking at, only that first story, only A River Runs Through It, is in that edition. And when I was trying to get some copies of The River Runs Through It for a presentation later this spring, that was the only hardcover that left at the University of Chicago Press, was a hardcover of the Barry Moser, using the Barry Moser wood engravings. It's a beautiful thing, but you don't get the other 2 stories. I did it anyway. I mean, that's what there was.
Okay. So for folks, another shameless plug, we do have the hardcover with the Barry Moser illustrations in our gift shop for sale. We also have a paperback version that has the additional stories in it.
That's all 3. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the way to do it.
So, and we have Home Waters and the Hemingway Big Two-Hearted River as
Oh,
well.
thank God.
We're never going to miss an opportunity, are we? I did want to cover one more thing before we wrap up here, and that is that I've had the pleasure of, over the last couple of days, really sitting down and thinking about how to engage children with this exhibit. And for me, it's all about the idea of illustration and how the pictures help tell stories. And I wanted to kind of, it was making me think a little bit of your kids and grandkids and the continuation of the Maclean story. And are there more journalists coming from the Maclean side of things, more writers?
Well, one of my sons, Dan, has produced 2 books. That's not his main occupation. He's a science teacher in Anchorage, but he wrote Paddling the Yukon River and its major tributaries. And it's kind of a guidebook on steroids. He did it a long time ago. And after it had been out about 15 years, it was a bestseller in Whitehorse year after year after year, which is where people put in to paddle the Yukon. It kind of trailed off, and I said, well, why don't you get the copyright on it and bring it out again and sell? He says, Dad, it isn't like that. He said, a guidebook is done after about 15 years because things have changed. And it's not a guide anymore. I said, okay, let me think about that. And I came back and said, look, I think your book is more than a guidebook. One of the things we've done with him is get historic Alaskan books, early books that were written about Alaska, beautifully produced and so on, and we give them to him as presents. So Alaskan literature is like your book. It's people who went out and did something that nobody else has done. Nobody else had ever done what he did. He paddled the Yukon River single-handed and the 5 major tributaries. It took him 5 years to do it because summers are so short. I said, your book fits into that. And in fact, it is still in publication. It still gets bought some. It's not a bestseller anymore, but it's still out there. My younger son, John Fitzroy, has got a book that he's trying to get published. That's a story about a young public defender who takes on a very dicey case of a kid. There are reasons to try to save the kid, and there are reasons to send him to prison. And we'll see how he does.
Exciting. That's exciting. All right. Any other final oh, I have one more.
Now, being a kite person, there is a lot of similarity between fishing and flying kites. When both you use line, in one you're fighting, there's a fish in water. The other is an evasive object that's trying to get away from you in the sky. I have a wonderful fish kite for kids.
Okay. So I don't know if you heard that, John, but Terry Zeeley is here, and she is a kite person, as well as she just attested to, and talking about that connection of the line on a kite and the line on a fish. And I'm curious about that fish kite for kids that she's got. Have you done any kite flying?
I have never made that connection before, and it's wonderful to learn something new.
That's great. All right. Well, I think that is our time, everybody. I appreciate your patience with the sound issues. I think on Zoom it worked pretty well. I will say that MCAT has been on here recording this. So if there were things that you missed in the room because the sound wasn't so great, you can watch it on Zoom in a couple of weeks when I have it and catch up on all of the little bits that you might have missed. I will let you know when it's on there. And John, again, thank you so much for your time, for your generous donation of resources to the world so that we can all enjoy this exhibit here in Montana for the next couple of years.
Well, I had a ball. I appreciate everybody who showed up. It's nice to see the faces. I wish I could have seen more of you. But it's always good to wish you could have seen more of people instead of less.
Well, here, I'll give you a quick look
Yes.
around the room.
Oh, good.
Nice few folks here and the art on the walls.
They're waving. Hi. Thanks
All
for
right.
doing that. Yeah, I
Yeah.
appreciate it. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to end the Zoom. Please be in touch if you have any questions and make sure you check our website up for information about those upcoming programs that we mentioned. We'll be here next week with Stephen Small Salmon and some traditional stories from the Salish and Killsby people. All right. Bye, everybody.